All right, so I already have the data loaded into this sheet, and I just want to talk about the actual calculations and the different ways to essentially calculate these projections. I have a few videos that will go back in the last couple of years and show you how to get all this information into the spreadsheet the way that I currently have it. And I just released a new course that will show you how to do this much more automatically so that you just press the refresh button one time. But what I've never done is what I'm going to do here in this video, which is go through different ways to calculate the projections, different ways to kind of see the outputs, because one of these versions might be more suitable for you. I know I've gone through them over the course of the last couple of years. So let's start with just the very, very standard projection calculation for NBA. And what we'll do is, because we have every player and how many fantasy points they score on a per minute basis, which I believe is very important, because especially for value plays or injuries or things like that, being able to project the minutes that a player is going to play for that night is going to be critical because of the actual usage in the NBA. So in a very absolute basic world, what you could do is take how many points per minute a player scores and multiply it by how many minutes they are expected to play for tonight and get a quote unquote projection. So minutes, which is actually historic, or points per minute, not necessarily a projection, this is historic, and multiply it times tonight's minutes, and 36.96 points for Russell Westbrook. That is like the absolute most basic. It is taking a reactive stat like points per minute, which is historic, and then actually taking a little bit of a predictive stat with the projection of how many minutes they're going to play to come up with a projection. And then for the value, all you will do is take their salary for tonight, divide it by 1,000, and then divide their projected points for tonight into that as well, and it would be 3.19 times value for Russell Westbrook, which certainly would not be enough. If I drag this down, you'll see how it changes for each player. Steph Curry projected for 48 points and almost 5 times value. Kevin Durant in this scenario, obviously injured at the moment of recording this before the season starts, but 49 points, 5.05 projected value. So that is like basic step one. What I would then want to get into are basically calculations around the opponent that they're going to play. So if you've watched other videos, what this column here is opponent versus position, OVP, which means if Russell Westbrook, who in this scenario is a point guard for the Oklahoma City Thunder, is playing the Golden State Warriors, this 1.07 is the number of points compared to the league average that the Golden State Warriors give up to opposing point guards. So 1.07, 1 is the league average. So 1.07 would be 7% more. Basically saying Golden State gives up 7% more fantasy points to opposing point guards than the league average. On the flip side of that game, Steph Curry is a 0.92 in this department because Oklahoma City gives up 8% less points, fantasy points, to opposing point guards than the league average. And the reason that we do this, put on a league average basis, is because, these guys are getting different matchups every single night across the league. Russell Westbrook's not always playing Golden State. They're playing Memphis, then they're playing Golden State, then they're playing Chicago, whatever. So we use the league as a baseline to see, and it's by position. It's not just by total defense. So that's part one of this. So what we can do then is use this calculation and say, okay, well, we know that Russell Westbrook is going to score about 1.5 points per minute, fantasy points per minute, and he is going to play about 24 minutes tonight. And now I want to throw in, okay, he gets a 7% boost because he is playing against Golden State. So very simply, again, what I can do here is just change the formula a small bit, put these two in parentheses so that it calculates the points per minute and tonight's minutes first, and then multiply that by the OVP, the defensive position. And Russell Westbrook is going to go from, so let me just see what he's at, basically 37 points. And this should go up if we have done it correctly, so that it is 7% higher, and it goes to 39.36. So that is correct, right? So now we're taking into account a few things. How many points per minute you're going to score, how many minutes you're going to play, and then the opponent that you're going to play and how many fantasy points they give up relative to your team's actual projection. Or I'm sorry, to your team's actual position, excuse me. So now we're making progress, and we can continue to go further here, because what I actually like to do, again, I talk a lot about, is this stat reactive or is it predictive? And points per minute, how many they've scored historically, that is historic. That is reactive, because we're looking back at past games to get that number. How many minutes they're going to play tonight, that is somewhat predictive. It might not be correctly predictive, but we're at least trying to say what's going to happen tonight, not what he has done over the last 30 games. And then opponent versus position, that is also reactive, because, again, we're looking back at historic numbers. That's not what we think they're going to do tonight. So I do like to get like one more predictive aspect into this, which is why I've always included the team's projected total for tonight. So again, highly encourage you to go through the course or go back and watch other videos if you want a little bit of a better explanation on this. But basically what we're doing is we're pulling in the Las Vegas line and total for tonight. So if the over-under is 200 and the game is a pick'em, that is essentially saying each team is going to score 100 points. That is the implied total for each team. Well, if you do it, if the total is 220 and the I'm going to try to do math here, and if the total is 220 and the spread is 10 points, that means it would be one team would be scoring 115 and one team would be scoring 105. That is 10 points difference. So that's the spread. And if you add them up, you get to 220. So those are so if you look at the Vegas line and total, it gives you what the implied score from Vegas is going to be. And while Vegas is certainly not trying to predict the outcome of the game, they're not. They tend to be very good at it, and they tend to at least be the most predictive thing that we have. So Vegas, of course, just trying to get the markets even on both sides, not actually trying to predict the score, but it's at least better because they're taking into account injuries. And if this team is coming off of, this is the second night of a back-to-back and they've traveled and like all of that stuff that we might not be able to quantify, Vegas kind of just takes in every single factor and pumps out an actual line, and we can use that for the implied totals. So that's what I've done here. So basically, let me see if I can explain this then. The total for tonight for Russell Westbrook is Russell Westbrook in the Oklahoma City is they're projected to score 104 points. And the average line for them, so here's what else I do, is I also keep track of all of the lines throughout the year. So if Oklahoma City's implied total for tonight is 104, and tomorrow night it's 115, and then it's 120, and then it's 98. I'm keeping track of all of that to again average it all out and say how much larger is this implied score than their average. And that's what this difference number is. And I can actually tell this is already backwards. This is supposed to be M2 versus N2. There we go. Because if you look at tonight's team implied total, it is actually about 2% less than the average line for Oklahoma City for tonight. So that would actually hurt Russell Westbrook. It would come down about 2%, assuming he, is the same level of usage in every game of the year, which is kind of the assumption here. It's going to come down a little bit. Here, Donovan Mitchell and Utah, tonight they're projected for 109 points when their average is 98 points. That's actually a 10% boost for Donovan Mitchell, which is a great boost. So now we can put that into the calculation, and we can continue on the same path here. We can just continue to say, okay, do the calculation of points per minute and minutes first, then add in position, and then we're going to put all of this in a parentheses, add in the difference for the opponent. Now this number should come down for Russell Westbrook. So I think it was at 39, and now it's going to go down to 38.4 because he gets a little bit of a knock based on his matchup for tonight in the team implied total. I have seen other people do it like this, where they will average together the opponent versus position and the line, and then multiply that into the points per minute. So it'll be a little bit different. So this is, let's see, 38.48 for Russell Westbrook at the moment. And you could come in here and you could just change the order of these if you wanted to. And sometimes actually, depending on how you do this, these aren't going to change. So let me see if I can do that first. Yeah, 38.48. So that didn't change it because I've just kind of done the exact same thing. But what you could do in theory is, hey, I want to average out these two first, or I want to do, I want to add the points. I want to add the minute projection last after I already take down his points per minute. So there's different ways I've seen people do this. I'm fine with either one of these, right? I mean, they're going to be relatively close to one another as long as you're getting points per minute, tonight's minute, opponent, and average line in there. And yes, I do understand this. There will be some overlap here, right? Vegas is going to take into account some of the other things that might be taken into account for opponent versus position. Not necessarily always going to be a perfect type of situation. There's a lot of educated guessing involved in this, but I think it's going to get us pretty close to what we're looking for. So that would be step number one of this, is to just take everything into account for what it's worth. But what I also want to do is allow you the option to weigh some of these. So, for example, you might want to give more weight to the opponent versus position column. You might want to give more weight to the Vegas column. You might want to give more weight to like the points per minute column or tonight's minute. So let me show you how to go about doing that. All right, so what I've done is I've just put the two factors that I want to take into account over here on the right-hand side. And you can really put these anywhere out of the way. But I've got implied total, so that's the Vegas total at 50%, and the opponent versus position at 50%. If you wanted to do more factors, if you wanted to do 3, I would start each one at 33%, just so that you make sure you know what you're doing here. This should add up to 100, so you'll see why in a second. But I've got my two factors here. So I'm just going to go back to my projection, and remember, this is doing points per minute times tonight's minute. Then it's taking the opponent versus position, and it's multiplying it into the average line, the implied team total. Those are going together, and then it's going back to the points per minute projection and tonight's minute projection, and it's multiplying those to add a little weight to it. So we can add a little bit more weight to it. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to separate out these two elements here on the right hand side, which is the OVP and the implied difference here. So I'll just start with the opponent versus position value here. So I'm just going to say L2 and multiply that times whatever is in this cell over here, which is X5, and then make sure that you lock this down, because as we drag this down, you want to make sure that this cell is never moving, because it's always just going to look back at whatever is in the implied total. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So that's 50%. And then I'm going to add that to the other 50% that I have here, which is going to be O2 times, actually, and I did this wrong, my weight here. So this should have been, I flipped these. This should have been X5 because I had them in backwards order. So make sure you're doing this right. So this is X5 and this is going to be X6 if you see that. So OVP is X6, which is right here, OVP, the green one. And then X5 is the implied total, which is this brownish looking one here. So we will multiply those by their weight, and then we'll add them together, and then we'll make sure that we group all of that up And we will, I think I'm going to get, yeah, I'm going to close one more parenthesis here. Whoops. There we go. So now this is your formula here at the top. Make sure you've closed out all your parentheses. And, here's Russell Westbrook's 37.74 projection for tonight. Now, if I change the weights on these, if I want to weigh opponent versus position, which is a positive stat for Russell Westbrook tonight. So if I change these to like 75 and 25 in favor of opponent versus position, Russell Westbrook's projection should go up from its current 37.7. So let's see if I've done this correctly. And it does, just a little bit. It goes up to 38.5. So you might want to actually, maybe you want to make it 80-20. And it actually doesn't move that much because they kind of level each other out a little bit. Let's see if I can find somebody who's a little bit more drastic here. Draymond, or hold on, where was Donovan Mitchell? Donovan Mitchell's right here. So Donovan Mitchell, he's positive in both aspects of this. So he's actually going to, if we go back to the 50-50 baseline, he's a 27. And then let's change it to, his position is bad. Okay, so we'll do this. We'll do implied total is 75. And we'll change this to 25. Yeah, he goes up like 4 points, which is a pretty big projection jump here when you go from 24 to 28 because you want to rely a bit more on implied total. So these are going to be small changes, it looks like, because most of the averages are going to be within, 5 or 6% of the league average for most parts. But when you get bigger differences, like in this case, Donovan Mitchell has a pretty significant difference here on the implied team total. It's 10%. And then if you weight that even more, it is going to go up. So, we just basically increased Donovan Mitchell's overall projection, 15, 20%, something like that. So these will start to add up, and then realizing that in the NBA, any number of just a handful of points kind of makes a big difference in your projection model. If someone goes from 24 to 28, that's a pretty significant difference. So you can go through here and just change these, but you'll see if you just start weighing them outside of 100, this is going to get pretty wonky. If I just throw 150 in there for implied total, everyone's averages go way up. So I recommend you just keep these everything has to equal 100. If you wanted to add more factors, you can certainly do it. And then this allows you to just be, a little bit more unique in what your projections are actually going to pump out. I want to change gears a little bit now because I know for whatever reason, projected points might not always be the best way to look at something. I know I get a lot of questions about hey, does it have to be points? I just want to look at rankings or something like that. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm just going to add a new column in here, and the ranking thing is pretty easy. So what I'll do is I'm just going to add a column for rank, and then let's just assume we have all of these going down to the bottom here. So I've got all of my positions or all of my players done here. And really what you can do is just do, you can rank them on anything you want, right? So you can rank them on projected points, for example. So maybe you want to do QQ. So this basically just says, rank Q2, which is Russell Westbrook's projected points amongst all of the other projected points. And then we want to go higher is better. So we want to go descending. Whoops. Oh, I know what the problem is. You can't have these NAs in here. So there's a little tip. So I'll just take those out really quickly. And when I do that, you'll see, Russell Westbrook is number 10 here. So Russell Westbrook at 36 points is the 10th highest ranked player for tonight. And if I've done this correctly, when I drag this down, Jimmy Butler should be lower than Russell Westbrook and Steph Curry should be higher. Yeah, and we've done that. So, okay, so now it's just ranking these guys. So I can drag this all the way down and you'll see, okay, here's Steph Curry, number 1 ranked player on projected points for tonight. CJ McCollum, 136. This is a view that I know a lot of people like to see. You can also just do it based on value, right? So you can say, hey, instead of Q2, use R2 and use the column R, because I don't care what their actual projected points are. I care who the best values are. And then down there, mostly for the most part, it's going to be the cheaper guys, right? So someone like Nerlens Noel, who in this crazy calculation is projected for 10 times value. You'll see he's a pretty good one. So he's your top 5 player. So you can kind of do this a couple of different ways, but I know that people like to kind of look at it from a ranked basis because some of the numbers can be a little much. And then the final way that I want to show you how to do this here is based off basically a score between 0 to 100. So I actually like this method. I use it a lot for baseball, especially because baseball is such a volatile sport. I have used it for golf, again, because of the volatility. NBA, obviously one of the more consistent sports, but I do like it just to kind of, it's not a projection. It's not really a rank. It just says, okay, from 0 to 100, how good is this player tonight? And 50 is the average. And if you're above 50, you're above average. If you're lower than 50, you're below average. So the way that, again, there's a million ways you can do this. I'm just going to show you one way that I would do this. And the factors that I'm going to use are going to be points per minute. I will also use team projected total, the team projected total, and I will also use the opponent versus position. And probably the best way to do this, or one of the ways to do this, is just going to be to rank all of those. So I'm going to actually, so that you can see this on the screen, I'm going to hide these columns over here so I just have a little bit more room to work with. And what I'll do is I'm going to say points per minute rank, and then I'll do OVP rank, and then I will do, what did I say? Implied rank, which would be the implied team total. So again, I'm just going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to say rank, rank Russell Westbrook's points per minute for all of the points per minutes, and we'll do it descendingly. And then, so he's number 1 there. And then I will rank opponent versus position. Now, some guys are going to have the same, because if you're a point guard on the same team as Russell Westbrook, this is going to be the same here, but we'll rank L2 by everything in L, and we'll do it descendingly, if I type it correctly. Stand by. I have an error there. There we go. I think I'm good now. There we go. And we'll do the same thing for the implied total. Again, you will have some ties here because of players on the same team. So we'll do, and actually, I guess what we'll do? We'll do the implied team projection just to mix it up a little bit instead of doing the difference between. So you can choose whatever you want here, but let me just show you how this can work itself out. So here's Russell Westbrook's ranks for each one of these, and then we'll drag these down so that we have them for every player. Cool. And then really what you could do is just sum these up. So Russell Westbrook is a 1, a 32, and a 95 rank. Add those together, it is 128. Okay, do that for everybody. So everybody has a score between, so already looking at it, someone like CJ McCollum, someone like Kyrie Irving, the lower the number would be better here. So I'll just call this the sum, and I'll try to make it easier to read for you. And then what you could do then is you want to find, because we need to find the league average, because we need to find 50 and as the average and the league average, I need to know what the average score of these are. So I'm just going to do it up here in this square, average, everything in AD. AD to AD, and it's 308. Okay, so that is our starting point. 308 is the league average. If you are under that, you're obviously going to be above average. If you are below that, you're going to be, or if you're above it, you'll be below average. All right, so now that I have my my averages here and my score, I put a score column here. I'm going to kind of think this out with you here. So I want to see. I want to compare Russell Westbrook's sum of his score to the average score in the league. So I'll do AD2 minus, or divided by AE1, which is the average up here. And basically it says, okay, so that's 41% less, but in our world, lower the score is actually better. So I'm going to do 1 minus and invert this. This is actually, okay, yeah. So now it's going to be okay. Basically what this says is Russell Westbrook is 58% better than the average here is the way that I would read this. Now, I want to be able to multiply this by 50, so I actually want to add 1 to it, and I know I just subtracted 1 to it to invert it, but so it's probably a better way to do this, but I'm just going to take this whole thing again, and just the order of operations is key here, and add 1 to it, and I should be able to get like 1.58, which I do, okay? So 1.58, now I can use that to multiply on what the league average is, which is what I want to say is 50. So then again, order of operations being critical, put all of that in parentheses and then multiply by 50, which will be our average. Okay. And Russell Westbrook's score is 79.2 out of 100, with 50 being the average. Now, when I drag this down, this is going to error out because I have not locked down this cell here. So I need to lock down AE1, which is the average for the league. I need to lock that down with a couple of dollar signs there. And then when I drag this down, it should start to populate. Yeah, cool. And what we noted is, so as I said, Kyrie, because the lower his number, he actually scores an 85. Because he has an 87 sum, so that's right. CJ McCollum scores higher because of his implied rank for tonight, so that's right. And then you can see the guys like Kevin Durant at a 41, that's below 50, so that is a below average play. So really, these scores are going to change every single night. The only way you could be like a perfect 100 is if you had the number 1 points per rank, the number 1 OVP rank, and the number 1 implied rank, right? You'd have to be like the perfect play for tonight. So you might have some slates where 85 is the highest score. You might have other slates where 92 is the highest score or 70 is the highest score. It just is going to depend on a nightly basis, but this allows you to kind of compare slate over slate because it tries to do a better job of, not just saying here's what's on that slate. It's kind of comparing it more so to the league averages. So again, I use this for other sports. I've tinkered with it a bit in the NBA, but it is very handy. And quite frankly, you can have all of these. I showed you like 4 or 5 different ways to calculate projections or rank them or whatever. You can have all of them in your projection sheet. It's entirely up to you, and you can use them however you want. So highly encourage you to mess around with these. Highly encourage you to join the course that I've put out there. If you're going through and building these NBA projection sheets for yourself and you want them to be sustainable and you want them to update almost automatically with you just pressing one button every single day, like that's where we're trying to get to, where this only takes you, after you set it up, after the initial setup, it only takes you like 2 minutes to update every single day, which is, I believe, where we're at right now. So highly encourage you to do that. Let me know if you have any questions or if I can expand on any of this, because it is kind of a little pet project of mine. I really enjoy doing it. So you can tweet me. It is @RickRunGood, or you can leave a comment below. Best of luck with this. Talk to you guys soon.